Hello and welcome back to the show. I am so excited today. I have Gemini Brett, one of my favorite astrologers on the show. I feel super honored to have him here. Gemini Brett, he is a world-renowned astrologer, shamanic StarryTeller, an inspiring educator, and is best known for his devotion to reconnecting astrologers with the sacred astronomy of the living sky, which I can't wait to talk about a little bit. Brett's passion, dedication, and innovation were recently honored by the Organization for Professional Astrology, who presented him with the 2020 Orion Award for Outstanding Contribution to Astrology. Brett is a sun in Scorpio, Gemini rising, and Gemini moon. And in human design, he is a generator. He's a 5-1 for his profile. And he's the left cross of wishes, which is really about like seeing this dream, this creativity, but also has all of the things to bring it into being and to help others kind of find their fantasy path and bring it into being. So thank you for being here. Welcome, Brett.
My pleasure. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Yes. I've been learning a lot from you. I found you on Astrology Hub. That's kind of where my gateway to being obsessed with astrology when they started teaching about the houses in astrology. I was always listening to astrology podcasts, but I was like, I don't know. And then when they started that series on astrology houses, I was like all in. All of a sudden, I was reading every author. I was finding everything out I could because it broke it down into a usable thing, right? Like it wasn't just, oh, here's your sun. Maybe I started learning about the moon a little bit, but I was like, I don't know. But it was when I had access to this like map and these cycles and where the planets are now and where they're moving and how they're interacting, all of a sudden it opened up like, okay, this is super useful. And that's what I'm always looking for. What's useful, right? Like, what can I do something with? Not just, I mean, obviously, we love curiosity, but what am I learning this for? And I just found such a gateway to that.
Yeah, the astrological houses are amazing, and some astrologies really don't use them. Where I started my study, there was very little use with astrological houses besides this kind of modern thing that would suggest that, oh, the third house is like Gemini because Gemini is the third sign from Aries. And there's actually like kind of an astronomical backbone that says something for that. The way that I've learned to see it is the tropical signs are our planet Earth's houses. But the houses, as we call them today, it's really getting outside, having your feet on the ground, and where are things oriented in like your local experience in the sky above and the sky below. And I mean, there's a lot of amazing systems like human design doesn't use houses,
Yeah.
right? It's only about signs and divisions of signs. But yeah, the more I'm outside, the more I practice with the living sky, the more I witness just things out the window and compare my experience of what's happening on Earth to, for example, where the sun is traveling through my local sky and through the houses at any given time, the more just the mysteries
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, you've
But
definitely inspired me to go outside more. I
nice.
don't know where it comes from. I was a weather forecaster in the Navy and we did a lot of model data. And I was always, you're a weather forecaster, you think you're looking at the sky, but you're not. You're looking at for computer screens staring at model data. And that's very much how I started my astrology journey, was staring at model data, pulling everybody's chart I could find, pulling every book, everything I could find, and learning that way. And I follow you, and when you say something is going on in the sky, I make myself go outside and start to learn it. It seems overwhelming right now. So it's still like staring up there, looking at my app, like what is up there?
Yeah, well, the password to the sky is a feeling called awe
Yeah.
and wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, imagine what the ancient weather forecasters were doing. Like, what were their computer screens?
Yeah.
Actually, I read this thing this morning. This would
Yeah.
be a great place to put this. I was recently gifted this book by my dear friend Cheryl, and it's by Jocelyn Godwin. It's called harmonies of heaven and earth, mysticism in music from antiquity to the avant-garde. Because I'm always trying to work on musical models to help me embody and have a sensual experience of the astronomical mysteries. And some of that's just getting outside and looking. But yeah, let me read this. Let's see. Here. A group investigating megalithic stone circles in Britain, notably the Rollright stones in Oxfordshire, once found that the stones actually give off ultrasonic vibrations of extraordinary strength, varying in regular patterns according to the time of day, phase of the moon, and season of the year. Right. And it goes on, but that in astrology is the big three, right? Like, so when we came on, you said that I have a Scorpio sun and a Gemini moon and Gemini rising. What are those three for you?
I have sun in Gemini, rising in Leo, and moon in Libra.
Got it. Right. And so one exercise I love to do before we get all esoteric and what does this mean or stare at on charts and computer screens is imagine, what Earth was doing in that moment. Um, and I'll just suggest for anyone who wants to practice this at home, astro dice are really cool, but you can do this with any 12-sided die really quick. But I'm just going to give a demonstration. So the astro dice, they're three-sided die, three 12-sided die. And one has the 12 signs. One has the planets out to Pluto and the north and south node, and I don't know where that one is, but I don't need that for this anyway. The other one just has the numbers 1 through 12, which is why you can do this with just two dice. But I'm going to roll. Let's say we're at that stone circle in Oxfordshire, right? So we're far north of the equator, and I'm going to roll this die to get the rising sign. All right, and I get Libra. All right. And then let's roll this number die to find the sun. This will help tell us what time of day it is and the season of the year. And I get 2. Okay, so what's 2 signs from Libra? Or I like to say it this way, it's much more musical. What is the second of Libra? And the answer is Scorpio, right? Okay, so we know, because we know where we are, we know when we are with the Scorpio sun. We know it's like this time that you and I are recording this thing in November. It's in Oxfordshire. I imagine getting pretty gray and leaves are falling and the sun is falling in the sky day by day. All right, so we know the time of the year, Scorpio time, the thin veil. And we know the time of the day, which I'm going to get to in just a second. But let's find the phase of the moon and see maybe how this stone circle, maybe an ancient weather-keeping device itself, is beaming out ultraviolet. All right, so let's go from that Scorpio sun, and I'm just going to roll this die again. And I got the number 11. Okay, so then the challenge is, what is the 11th of Scorpio? And the answer, and it's a little easier to count backwards, but the answer is Virgo. So Virgo is the 11th of Scorpio. Okay, so let's put our feet on this beautiful ground, some ancient circle of stones. Everyone, please close your eyes. And just try to be here in this moment. Libra's on the rise, a Scorpio sun, and a Virgo moon. And really experience that. So we'll do the earth astrology of this. The mighty Orion walks the southern sky, ever chasing the Pleiades, protected by that bull who stares from the southwest towards the rising space to see the horns of a crescent moon, waning crescent, wise moon, who reflects sunlight from beneath the lion's haunches. This night was longer than the last, and tomorrow will be longer than this. But we have survived the dark, and though there is so much dew and mist, the first birds begin to chirp. We see through the fog the sherbet colors in the southeast announcing the coming of the light. So this is the thing I love to do with clients, right? And it's like before we get all into this is your code, this is your blueprint, this is the recipe of your soul's dance, and this would be a good job for you. Um, and these are good dudes to avoid, or whatever. Like, let's try to put our feet on the ground. Some of the old astrology charts will actually tell you, was it clear? Was it cloudy? What direction was the wind coming from? Was there a chill in your bones? Was it a sweaty time of the day? What animal was first to be seen? And, oh, you know what I'm just realizing? So I have my cameras arranged. I don't know if how people watching this on video, or certainly won't see this listening, but in such a way that you are above me.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's kind of like your beautiful plant is growing out of mine. And then I have a sun on one side of my screen,
And I have the moon.
and you have a waning crescent moon. At least if we're looking from the northern hemisphere view, like in Oxfordshire, where we just were. And it literally is like, if I look at the line between our cameras, I imagine people later will see us side to side. But is that is like the rising sign, and you're what's above ground, and I'm what's below ground. It's crazy. Like, I literally just rolled the dice to depict that image. Okay.
Well, and
Oh,
your sun is this really depthful Scorpio that, like, kind of digs deep, and my sun is, yeah, in the 11th house, just like, where are we going? In Gemini. So you're really grounding me. Actually, your sun is right on my Saturn and Pluto as well. So it's like pulling me down, slowing me down. It's very interesting.
you have Saturn and Pluto conjunct in Scorpio?
They're actually conjunct in Libra, but the very last degrees
Oh,
of
got it.
Libra. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's the same gene key, or so I always love to do the lessons of Saturn and the lessons of Pluto. And I always take that gene key or gate in human design to kind of tell the story. And so your sun is in the 50, which is really this like nurturing. So it's in the gate of the tribal, like the tribal mother instead of the tribal father. The tribal father is the other side of the defense system, but this is the tribal mother. But it's like very nurturing, and it really wants to take care of, but it's really fearful of having responsibility or taking care of, right? And
Mm.
so that's a theme that I'm always coming across, is like, I want to give knowledge, I want to take care of, I want to go out, but it's like, am I am I going to take responsibility for that? Am I going to, so it's a very interesting dance, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that the gene keys aren't constricted to sign cusps, right? So,
Yeah.
or we should say, what do you call them in human design that the gene keys is rooted from? Like the keys or the gates, or
It's rooted in the Chinese I Ching. So,
right, right. I know how
yeah.
we mapped it, but what do
Oh,
you
yeah.
call them? Like, what's the term for those little divisions of the zodiac?
So yeah, it would be a gate in
Gate.
human design, or
Right.
a key in gene keys. But yeah,
Yeah.
they're both mapped off of the same thing, and it's interesting too because you can see where they talk, which is, so not only do I know what house it's in for somebody, but I also know where it's speaking from in their body. So that's a spleen, that's a safety, right? So it's always going to be coming up of like, is this safe or not, right? And it's just, yeah, it's interesting to have that added amount of information.
There's an ancient system. There's very few ancient astrological systems where any kind of division of the zodiac will extend across the walls between signs. Like in the ancient view, it's very what we call platic, meaning like plates, like the 12 whole signs, like old Hellenistic image, or even like the Indian, the Vedic images of the zodiac were much more like a dodecagon, like a 12-sided figure than a circle. I mean, when we watch the moon wax and wane, that's much more of a cyclical and cyclical process, and of course that was honored as well. But anyway, there is one ancient division of signs called the bounds or the terms. And as with all things confusing in astrology, there's different opinions as to which are the correct ways to divide these signs in these very strange asymmetric divisions. But the Hellenistic astrologers used a system called the Egyptian bounds. And fascinatingly, and it's kind of cute, Libra is the only sign who shares bounds across her cusps and both of them. So there is, I mean, I'm not going to say it's going to map to the gene key. In fact, it can't because it's going to be some whole number of degrees. But there is a connection between late Libra and early Scorpio and that system as well.
Yeah.
Although probably not the tribal mother because it's said to be the bounds of Mars. Right.
I've been looking, yeah, I've been looking at to where they're shared because they're not shared everywhere. So they're shared. There's some Cancer, uh, Gemini that share a cusp in some of the gates, and yeah, the Libra, Scorpio. So I've been looking and seeing, and then yeah, I've been playing with the fact: would I a 29-degree Libra sun or a 1-degree Scorpio sun, would I, if I'm looking at the gate, would I look at it with more of a scorpionic lens, or would I look at it with more of a Libra lens? It's just an interesting way to play with, because every system somehow works, right? Like if you try anything, it somehow works, but it's when you start to gather all of these tools, how do you play with them in a way that makes sense, is what I'm always
Yeah, I
always
mean, it's
grappling
a
with.
skeptic in me has a hard time with the sacred science, and that sometimes it feels much more sacred than scientific, and I'm fine with that. I had this dream once that was great, and it was of this like strip mall with a psychic shop, this huge yellow awning that said psychic on it. And I've seen strip malls just like this in Oregon driving around, so that's, I think, probably fed this dream. But right next to that shop, there was a very similar looking shop, but its awning said skeptic. And I was like, oh, I shop at both of those places. Um, People will say this these days, especially in defense of the truth. Like maybe you caught when I was just describing that Virgo crescent moon in that vision, that it's beneath the celestial lion, right? So tropical astrology, which can't be seasonal if it also works in the southern hemisphere,
Yeah.
or if it works as well in Hawaii as it does in Oxfordshire, which have a very different experience, of course, of Earth's year and the seasons.
Yeah.
Tropical astrology is definitely not constellational. In fact, no equal sign division of the sun's path can be constellational because the constellations of the zodiac vary significantly in size. Like
Yeah.
the mighty ram is only 15 degrees, which is half of our 12ths or signs, and the priestess is like 47 degrees of sky, right? So one thing that often happens to the tropical astrologer is this kind of shattering when, you know, they go outside and look to a Virgo moon and get their phone app out and they're like, wait, that's the lion, and what? Right? And so like going through that kind of shattering of, wait, these signs are not constellational. It's easy for people to go, oh, then they're seasonal, but then again we get into the kind of seasonal opposition between the hemispheres and etc. And so it's like, well, what in the heavens is the zodiac? And I've been very fond of asking that question. I think I found an answer, though I can never prove or disprove it really. Um, but we see that, I mean, it works, right? And that kind of scientist in me, I'm an engineering mind, really wants to have some kind of framework, a design behind this thing to like, what is it? Why is it? Am I just like adding enough variables to my equation that I can bend it to say whatever I want? You know, that kind of like mathematical trick where you have somebody pick a number and then you tell them to add so much and divide and whatever, and it always gets the same number, and you're like, it's 11, and they're like, oh, you right? It's like, I like worry, am I doing that sometimes? So there's a couple things I say. One is, let's keep the sacred science sacred by honoring the scientific, and scientific by honoring the sacred. We really need the measurable and the immeasurable to speak in geometrical terms for lines and curves. But another thing, and one thing I really love so much about astrology versus like my love for the tarot, for example, is there actually is something in the sky I can point my finger to. Like there is actually some physical mechanism, right, that's happening to kind of determine these things. And, you know, it's in that sense super real. So I always say, like, astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And when we re-nature our astrology by reconnecting to the living sky, then we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. And for me, so much like I have all of these just little simple revelations being out there and watching Mercury as a morning star. It's like, oh, like that's why. Or just watching a sunrise. And in from the first, which is hidden beneath the ground, into the 12th, which is where we see the sunrise, and yet they call the 12th hidden things. And it's like, wait, what? That's where things become unhidden. But when the sun rises to illuminate the earth, he hides the heavens.
Yeah.
Right? At night, we can tell time with all of these spinning stars. By day, there can be only one, and you can only tell time with your shadow, which is an important remembrance, you know? So there's part of me that loves astrology as just a very obvious expression of the astronomical reality. Like the simplest example of that is day and night. You know, we are different beings at 3 p.m. than we are at 3 a.m. if we want to talk clock time, and nobody can deny that. And that's an astronomical reality of Earth's rotation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's like even before we get to the phases of the moons and the pull of the tides, or whoever, some mystical ultraviolet measurements at the circles of stone. You know what I'm saying? Like just day and night. That helps us understand astrology is the poetic breath of nature. But there's much of what I do that is symbolic and much like kind of weird fractal time techniques where we turn days into years or whatever. And it just gets weird. And in that sense, like you were just saying, or what I heard, you know, I mean, there's shamanism of throwing lots, you know, throwing sticks, throwing stones, right? Lion bones, and just being able to kind of read the weather based upon what you see. And I'm very fond of these approaches too. I mean, human
Yeah.
design is a whole nother thing. It seems incredibly scientific, but it's like, where the heck did Ra receive all of that from?
I just love it because it differentiates in a way that helps me to deepen whatever I'm looking at, right? But at the same time, it is so much like I would love to understand as deeply as Ra understood it. I'll never get to that point, but what I do understand, it helps me in so many ways. It helped me start to understand myself in a way that I could kind of get my operating system down. I always think of it as the manual, right? Like human design doesn't really change. Yes, you can look at transits and things like that, but it's definitely like your operating system. And then you look at astrology and it gives you so much more. Like even you were just talking about the 12th house. My son has lots of planets in the 12th house, like almost everything in the 12th house. It's in Pisces. He's a Pisces rising. And that could sound really scary when you're first learning astrology, right? Like when you look at what astrologers say about the 12th house and Pisces and things like that. But just even hearing you talk about it in that way, it's like, yeah, he is kind of bringing this imagination, this otherworldliness into reality. And even once his progressed son started moving into the first house, it was like he was the most angelic baby. And now he's like, boom, on fire. Let's go. Let's
Hmm.
learn these kind of lessons, and learn how to bring that through. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
the 12th is very much like that. You know, when you wake up but you're paralyzed and kind of stuck in between the dream and the waking world, right? It's a super mystical place. And
yeah,
I mean, you know, some of the ancient delineations for the 12th are definitely not pretty. Some of that has to do with geometry and with like optic theory, or I mean, I could play it for you musically, like it's weirdness.
yeah,
But importantly, it's weird, right? So, like
yeah,
in a culture that like adores the weird and those who have like mystical sight and can bring the dream into the reality, then it would be a very supported and honored expression, and hopefully
yeah,
it will be more and more. And like, what a gift to have really strong twelfth-ness and to be born to a mystic mom, right?
yeah,
But you know, I think so many will go to sit in a pew where they read books about people who talk to angels, and that's cool. But if you do, then they have a straitjacket for you. You know what I mean? And that's
yeah,
some of the challenges with the 12th and like a culture that's such a material, you know, listic focus, if you will.
yeah,
Um, yeah. You know, there's a reason. So I actually would talk about the crystal at the center of the earth real quick, and then maybe
yeah,
we can talk about the 64 and gene keys in a sense, and maybe in like an astrological correspondence. So there is a reason why like we have this 7 note scale. You just heard eight, but the eighth, the top one, is the same note as the bottom. It's called the octave, which is the eighth note, but it's like that same note in the next range. And this will actually bring us to some kind of astrological correspondence, at least like from kind of modern German schools that I think really support Ra's vision of 64 divisions of the zodiac. But first, let me divide it into 12. So here's that sound again on a very different instrument. So those are 7 notes, like 7 traditional wandering lights, which is planets, the wandering stars, right? The ones that we can see with our eyeballs, including the sun and the moon. And here's the 12. You hear 13, but that top one is the same as the first, right? Um, so people like on this kind of 13 sign trip, they haven't ever swept a compass. They haven't studied the geometry or the musical harmony, or cycles, like the 13th moon is actually the first of the next year. But anyway, when we do study the geometry, you come quickly, for those of you who are listening instead of watching, you won't see what I'm pointing to the camera, which is a seed of life. But you probably know the so-called sacred geometry shape of the seed of life, or you could quickly search it online. It's 7 circles built of 6 around one, and it makes 2 6-pointed flowers. So one is within this inner circle and one is without. And so this is just like how, basically how you draw a zodiac, how you draw a 12 slice thing. And it's incredibly natural. Like if we, you know, bake a pie and we want to make slices, we typically cut it in half, and halves of the halves for fourths, and halves of the halves of the halves for eighths. You know, and if you got a lot of people there, you're trying to stay slim, maybe go into 16ths and 32nds and even 64ths. By the time you cut 64ths with your pie, they're probably not going to look like even geometries, right? But when you sweep a compass, like the geometer's tool that draws curves, which are immeasurable, you quickly get to the shape called the vesica piscis, 2 circles of the same radius, centered on each other's circumference. The sacred almond, the mandorla, it's been called, the gateway, the yoni, the portal of all creation. And from there, the compass just keeps moving around the circle, and you create 6 circles around one. So seven. There's actually something called kissing numbers, which in two dimensions, you can take six, well, seven pennies or seven nickels or seven circles, any circle of the same size, and you will get six kissing each other around one. In three dimensions, the kissing number is 12. So if you take a basketball, 13 basketballs of the same size, you get 12 around that inner one, right? And so that's another thing about this 13 thing that's popping up in weird ways in our current time. They forget that actually the 13th is the first. It's the inner thing. It's you inside all of this. All right. So as I've been like, first of all, like just exploring in the ancient ways, not only number in time and space, which is astronomy, according to the old sacred sciences of the quadrivium. Well, if number in time and space is astronomy, the measurable side of the heavenly happenings, then we should study number in space, and that's geometry, and number in time, frequency, which is harmony, right? And number itself. So number in time, frequency, like there's a very beautiful reason why we have a 7-note scale and 12 tones in that octave of space. Like that's not just some human construct. It's actually the breath of nature. And there's some challenges with it that get way too technical to talk about here. But it is very much a natural expression of nature, as is the seed of life. For me, these things teach that creation creates in 12s. Which is just something that's why my students all start also with a compass in their hand before we start learning like rules of astrology and use it like some math. Like let's understand what it is, where it comes from. So the other piece of my quest of like, what is this thing? First of all, I've definitely proven to myself and anybody who's willing to listen that like so many ancient systems of wisdom traditions, the tropical zodiac is directionally aligned. In fact, it's directionally defined. It's all about what I call Gaia's spine, or the sword of our stone, or the world tree, Earth's rotational axis. And the crossing points of two great circles. One is the plane of our day, Earth's spin, that's the equator. And the other is the plane of our year, Earth's orbit, and that's the ecliptic. And the way that those two circles interface, cross, and diverge from one another, like that builds the four cardinal directions, the four cusps of the cardinal signs. Why we get from those four very real astronomical realities to 12, I think demands for the student who wants to get into the science and not just believe what teacher says, the geometer's compass. And it's really helpful to have a vibrating string around. So I would say really quickly that there's a thing that I found in the science, and it's hard to find. It's kind of been scrubbed from the internet, and sometimes I wonder if that's because they're trying to hide the truth because I am a card-carrying Scorpio conspiracy theorist. Or maybe if they've just gone on to different theories and maybe proven this one was wrong. But some years ago, there was a Carnegie Research Institute or Science Institute, I forgot what they're called, paper that was published in Nature that spoke about how our computer models of the data we're getting just by shooting beams into the inner earth and listening to what comes back and at what rate to try to determine what's actually at the center of earth. Like you and I were taught at some like molten iron that nobody knows, right? But the data has actually over the years shown that there's more like these crystals, these nanocrystals of like hexagonal shape, which feels amazingly 6y, and regular hexagons have 6 points and 6 sides, which feels a lot like 12 to me. And also like the combination of those shapes in cubes. But this paper proposed, and then according to the paper, the computers saw most resonance and support for the math, the limited data we have from our explorations of the inner core through, radar, sonar, etc., that this could be just one gigantic crystal, hexagonal crystal, and aligned as they're seeing in the data to Gaia's spine, to the cardinal directions. And again, a hexagonal crystal has 6 points and 6 sides. So if you go, everyone, look right now at the North Pole of Saturn. You're going to see, have you seen this,
Mm-mm.
Angela?
No, I
Oh
haven't.
my God, it's amazing. Since, I mean, if you believe NASA, I don't know how deep into the conspiracies you go, but since like the Viking first visited or flew by Saturn in, I think, the late 70s, we've been photographing. Saturn's North Pole has a perfect regular hexagon. And they call it a storm. Like nobody knows what it is. It's been there since then. It persists. It's 3 times the diameter of Earth. It's this gigantic regular hexagon. Actually, on Jupiter's south pole, there is a regular hexagonal formation of 6 different storms. So what's up with these hexagons? And for me, those like gas giant teacher beings, they just happen to be composed of the right stuff, that their surface expresses something that's down below, because I've come to believe, and this is what I said earlier, like I can never prove it wrong, but I can't prove it right either, that at the core of every planet, or maybe every spinning thing that also orbits, including suns, there is this regular hexagonal core. And the regular hexagon is 6 and 6, right? So it's the 12, and it's 6 inner polarities and 6 outer polarities, and this is like the zodiacal fabric. And while this won't be defined by the stars of our sky, like this is where it kind of breaks from the ancient tradition. But the ancient tradition itself broke away from a star-based zodiac, at least in the quote unquote West, because I believe what they were noticing over time is that while the stars help us see like the reference plane for where things are traveling, it's not the stars that define these energetic centers. It's rather something beneath our feet. And the last thing I'll say before I end this terribly long monologue is this: like, we don't measure the planets in the signs from the surface of the earth, from where we live, breathe, and can witness these heavenly happenings, but rather from the center of the earth, which beautifully is the place where we are all connected. Like you and I, Angela, have different stars above our heads right now, right? But down at the base of our spine, we will meet in the middle. But if you think about this, that we're not measuring from the surface, but rather the center, that's called geocentric versus topocentric. It's telling you that astrology is not about how these planets are moving you, right? Or your experience of the planets. It's about your experience of Earth's experience of the planets. And there's something so real there,
Yeah.
right? So when this baby takes her first breath, right, and steps into this new phase of existence, and we cast a chart and analyze it in all of these different ways, or maybe observe, as I was saying before, like Orion in the sky chasing a bull that was looking at this crescent moon reflecting Scorpio light about to rise, or whatever, that there's actually something in Earth's experience at that moment, maybe in her vibration or hum, right, that is encoded then into this one who first takes their breath into that moment, that is an expression of celestial symphony that will never, ever, 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 ever repeat. And a wonderful thing about the sun, moon, and rising sign is like, I don't need to even add Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. Like the sun, moon, and earth, like that's all I need to prove that every moment is entirely unique, will never ever repeat. And each of these moments, the way that the moon is delivering sunlight to our earthly eyes, or not somewhere beneath the ground, like that's experienced in every different space on earth in an absolutely unique way.
Yeah. And that just like brought it so home. one thing I just want to talk about is maybe even the experience of when you start getting intentional and you start being grounded in the earth. Because I feel like a lot of people, I'll say, like right now we have Mars and the sun in the Kazemi, they're
Yeah.
touching each other, and it's been a really hard week for me. Just very charged. I just feel very charged. I feel I almost, you know, yelled at my son's coach or my son's friends. It's in my fourth house, and I've just been like very charged about everything going on with him, or, just and I'm just taking a breath and letting it kind of go through me. These aren't my favorite energies. I don't really have anything in Scorpio. It's just kind of hidden in my fourth house there. And but yeah, it's just, I feel it so deeply. And maybe because I'm a Leo rising and sun is so connected to my chart, but I just feel it so strongly. And I'll ask people and they're like, huh? They're just like so disconnected from anything. I started to kind of watch the moon a lot more and even go outside during new moon and full moon. And even the women, like as women, we have our menstrual cycle, right? It's starting to match the sun or the moon's cycle now that I've been paying attention. Before it was opposite, right? It was so off. And I'm like, oh, I'm so off. And now that I've been paying attention, it's almost exactly, it's moving in the direction of being matched up with the moon's cycle. It's
Where is
just,
the Remind me, where is the moon when you were born in the zodiac?
mine is in Libra, 20
So
degrees
Libra
Libra.
moon and
Yes.
Leo sun. No, Libra rising,
Sun
sun in
in
Gemini.
Gemini. I'm like a what, first
Gotcha.
quarter moon, I believe.
No, I mean it's trine. I mean it depends on like the
Oh yeah.
actual degrees and which system you use, so I should say that. But
It's like
Libra,
113
like
degrees from the sun.
a Libra moon reflecting Gemini light. Like if you're just into the code of 12ness, that's a triangle, that's a trine, right? I mean, there's 30 degrees of each place. So when we get nerdy and break the ruler out, things change significantly, right?
Yeah.
And is it early or late Gemini and early or
Yeah.
late Libra and all that? But in a
Yeah.
sense, like I prefer to kind of start with 12 phases of the moon, which is not like what's accepted by astronomy or astrology today for the most part, that you're using eight, which is intriguing. And actually, that can bring us back into the human design also, and maybe the design of the human design in these gates. But like, I like 12, like just to, I can very much see the difference between a moon one sign away and two signs away. Actually, I appreciate systems like in Hawaii, they have 30 phases of the moon. They have a different name for each day of the moon's waxing and waning. But just generally speaking, like if I say, how does Libra moon reflect Gemini light to my eyes, right? The
Hmm.
opposition to Gemini, of course, is Sagittarius. So Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. The moon isn't there yet. It's waxing. It isn't full yet, right? It's growing. And that is like the waxing gibbous shape, they often say. But I just call it the waxing trine. And some will say if you track that, in one of the old kind of recipes that does have some decent statistical support, is that not only women but men as well are most fertile in their natal moon phase. So it's something I'll do in like fertility coaching with astrology, of like helping women and men kind of regulate to their natal moon phase if they want their like biological fertility to
Yeah.
coincide. But then on another level, and what I'm really hearing from you, and I think it's so wonderful, first of all, like I'll just say this thing, as above, so below, and I'll get back to that. But as you kind of re-key into the silver light of the night and the growing and shrinking of the moon and the phases, there's something that's happening with your body. Like you're realigning to, I'll say, Earth's experience of the heavenly happenings. Sorry about the barking dog. If you're hearing Isabel right now, she gets really excited about this stuff. Um, so this, right? So like when I, like, speaking of Isabel, that's why she's barking. I took her for a walk last night, and we're out and about, and like I don't even know like moon phase until we get to this park down the hill. Because I'm just in all of these street lamps, you know? And it doesn't care if it's new moon on the darkest nights or full moon when we have sun fully reflected by that silver being of the eve, like keeping it like you can take a hike in Arizona in a full moon and like not even bring a flashlight, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just like I live in a place where I'm not even having that natural experience, and it can be really powerful. Like there are moon lamps. I've actually been working on the development of kind of like a moon lamp that can, on one level, just like for us when we're sleeping, help us experience the moonlight growing and shrinking throughout the month as it is now. But also maybe to kind of alter that to a person's natal phasal situation, if there is any truth to this like fertility at that time. And I mean, I'm very fortunate in my path that I've been around a lot of like strong awakening, just magical women who are very much connecting to their menses. And then, you know, what can we dudes do but learn about that from them, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been really fortunate to be like coached by some women who are understanding more about like the monthly cycles, because I have tides too, right? But I have much less of a biological feedback to like understand or be forced to have a look at that. And so many will just be told not to look anyway, right? It's so that's, I think, a really beautiful thing that you're doing, an important thing. And so there's this code that we say as above so below, and for many like astrologers that's enough. Like, well, how does this thing work? As above so below. It's like, okay. Right? But importantly, that comes from a great sacred scripture called the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. And the first rubric is not just as above, so below. It says, this is Isaac Newton's translation, who is far too mystical to be considered Newtonian, actually, in our parlance of that word these days. But his translation of Hermes' Emerald Tablet, the first of the 14 rubrics, says, "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of one only thing." Now, I think very importantly, the one only thing is actually the star of that rubric. And it's completely forgotten when people simply say as above, so below. But importantly, he also, before as above, so below, so above. And the way my first teacher, Daniel Germario, then at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, described this as like, when you come to the mysteries come to you, right? So like before we started, Angela just spoke this beautiful kind of invocation for what's going to happen here, and to make sure it's guided and right, and hopefully this is dancing to that great calling, that song. But you know, it's that like when we come out to the mysteries, like it opens up for us. I'm like not such a grounded dude in my wiring. My human design, I would imagine, reflects this. But you know, when I get outside and I stare at the sky, instead of it taking me out to space, it really plants me on the ground. And you know, honestly, it was plants and sacred plants that brought me to the planets and to this work in the first place. But there's some, and I'm always drinking tea, which kind of like reaches me up and also roots me down into the ground. But there's something just so earthly and so human about the heavens, because there's, you know, I like to say we're living vows of the marriage of heaven and earth. You
Yeah.
know, when we get out there, we really act as like antennas of the above and below. But so I just love to hear so much that in this practice, like I went outside and now suddenly my menses are regulated to the phases of the moon. Like what a simple and beautiful expression. And to use a phrase from my dear friend David J. From Love and Rockets, it's as simple as a flower, and that's a complicated thing.
Yeah. I would love to hear your take, because what the more that I learn about astrology and look at people's charts over and over and over again, I'm I can always see that are they are the planets bringing them to this thing? Are they, but the whole chart is within us, right? Like we have the entire chart within us, right? And it's just very interesting. I guess I'll use a story too. So when I look at my chart, I can see my children in it, right? I have this Neptune, this sun opposite Neptune. My youngest is very Neptunian, right? Like he is 12th house Pisces, everything. I have Saturn trining my son. My other son is a Capricorn. He is the most driven, grounded person in the entire world. He grounds me. I see them reflected in my chart, right? My husband's a I have what's on the 7th house. I have Aquarius. He's an Aquarius sun. We just see these things reflected, and it's like, are we drawing the entire chart? Because even I have a friend that doesn't have children. She has dogs, and she was talking about her dog's personality the other day. And she has these 3 dogs, and their personality are literally, she's the most nurturing person. They're her personality in different ways, and she gets to nurture herself through taking care of these dogs, these big personalities that maybe she doesn't feel so comfortable going within to feed, but she's feeding them in these expressions that are outside of her. And I just feel like I just see that all the time. Are we pulling our charts to us? Are they, and it's that same concept too with the crystals, right? The crystals in the center of the earth and the crystals in the different planets that are maybe reflecting or talking to each other. I mean, that's what a radio is a crystal, or was at one point. Like, how do you see astrology working in your life? And maybe even like, how did you first feel when you started to learn your astrology? Did it change the way you looked at your life?
Oh,
Um,
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't till pretty late for me. I mean, I always knew I was, quote unquote, a Scorpio, and that was it. And sometimes I would see a newspaper horoscope. I used to think that's what a horoscope meant. Um, and yeah, sometimes it would resonate, sometimes not. I mean, the skeptic in me was like, that was just some kind of general thing that should resonate with anyone. Um, and then later, I mean, I had friends, trusted friends, who both said I should get a reading with this guy, and then a third did, like all in the same week. So I was like, okay, and that was Daniel Gemario, and I ordered his book while I was on the waiting list to have a session with him. Some couple months later, I think. And that book is the Shamanic Astrology Handbook, which is a very kind of beautiful, simple, modern astrology system that has more ties to ancient astrology maybe than and into the living sky. Um, and that's when I found out I was Gemini moon, and my birth time matters, and Gemini rising, and wow, that said so much. And then I have Venus in Virgo and Mars in Cancer, are really important to that particular paradigm's approach, and that said so much. And so that was just kind of shocking to realize, like, um, not only did this thing seem to describe a lot of my, like, talents and challenges and whatnot, um, but that it helped heal in me, that I have these different pushes and pulls, and some of them seem to really contradict. I mean, that's one thing I love about an astrology chart. It kind of confirms that we're all schizos and it's okay. And how can we learn to honor each of these voices who kind of come up in different ways? Now, as I've been inclined more and more towards traditional astrology, it works very differently. Like the modern thought is, like, I don't know, maybe just very simply, Mercury is your thought and Venus is your love and yada yada. Traditionally, there's like one planet that represents you. And then in your chart, you're going to have different planets, like Saturn, actually, because Aquarius is setting, would represent your husband. So that Libra, Saturn, Pluto thing you described before, that's going to say something about, your relationship with him. And then looking at how the Gemini sun relates to Libra, Saturn in your chart will say something about the relationship code. Like, this is older astrology. And I just see sometimes it really literally expressed. So, like, your eldest child will be represented by the Lord of the fifth, who in the Leo rising chart, the fifth sign is Sagittarius, so this is Jupiter, right? And then we can look at the relationship between Mercury, who actually represents you. So I said that. You're Leo rising. So the
yep.
sun, who represents you, and Jupiter, to kind of look to your relationship with your first child. And it's never just Jupiter. Like Jupiter is going to be involved in all these different relationship with other planets, and where is he? And yeah, I mean, you always get this very intricate and very unique code. But that to me can be like mm, very helpful in astrology when I'm sitting with clients and they're often, describing an issue with someone, and they push that someone's chart at me, and I'm like, no, like, get that thing away. This is in you. Like, this is in your code, and we can look for it's like hard to do. And one of the great challenges with astrology, this might be the third time I've said it. First of all, it's hard to get a clean experiment because there are so many variables, and the observer should influence the experiment, and I think that's good. But secondly, you go through these different, like, I have thousands of books here and they all disagree as to how you're supposed to do the thing. I have found that in the traditional methods, it more typically expresses in this literal stuff. Like, I can see your father's job, and it is weird. And like, the skeptic in me revolts. You know what I mean? Like, how could it be so? Before we came on, Angela was describing pretty accurately some of my digestion based upon my human designs. Like, where the heck is that coming from? And then what do you do with it? And on one level, it can be just such a helpful tool. And I mean, I like to get outside, go to the sky for the things that are visible with the naked eye, to really receive them, to then close my eyes, to hear them, to smell them. When I'm outside celebrating like a moon Jupiter occultation, as I was some months ago, very importantly, blue heron flies by, and then owl. And then after sunrise, I see three deer, which is actually my, Mayan day sign in some systems, and then hawk. Like, all of that really matters to me. And I'm in a session with somebody, and I'm looking out the window, and there's an elementary school down the hill, and they do a fire drill, right? Like that. Like, there's something precious about that in the moment. Or I see a great happening like Mars Cazimi today. Like, it can be easy to over astrologize, which typically brings you into fear response and can really freeze you. And that's, probably not where we want to go. It can also be used as this justification tool for my particular idiosyncrasies or idiocies. And I think that's not the way we want to go. Astrology should be a way in, not a way out. But once we get into electional astrology, which is like choosing good dates and whatnot, and avoiding challenging times, it can really handcuff you as much as open up powerful practices for aligning with the heavens. It's like we used to just make our decisions based upon either schedule or when it felt right, and probably both. And it's important not to lose that kind of intuitive wisdom, right? And so for me, like, sometimes I'm really following charts. I mean, I have this weird thing, like, part of my client confidentiality is like, I'll do a session with someone, we're really deep in their chart, and then it's just gone as soon as the session ends. I might see them a third time, and they'll be like, remember last time? I was like, I don't remember at all. And I try not to take notes, which isn't like the greatest like service, I think, as a practitioner, but I want to let them be them. I want to be me. And sometimes I'm looking at how the current transits of the planets are activating me, and sometimes I'm not. And those times I can go outside and I'm just like, oh, moon's like on Orion's club, out of bounds in Cancer. Wow, that's like where Mars was when I was born. And like, I'd rather like see that chart in the heavens. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question. I'm answering probably a lot of ones that weren't asked anyway. But it's like, here's astrology. What does it say about me? What do I do with it? And I do find it can be an amazing tool, especially at times where maybe we feel like we've lost our way. Which, by the way, I don't think we can. I think the most
Yeah.
beautiful thing about the path is you can't leave it. But at the same time, it can be really helpful to get some reflections
Yeah.
and if sessions are when sessions are productive, they always, for me, offer something to do, right? Something that will help you shift, or something that will help you like stay the course when things seem off and like it's not working. And sometimes you can be like, well, this doesn't seem to be like your greatest passion or how you can make a living. And it's like, oh, it's not. It's just something I do to make money. Okay, well, then why would you be rewarded for that?
Yeah.
Or maybe you are financially, but I'm talking to you because you're feeling drained, right? So, like, how else can you be rewarded? And what, so what if you did this instead? Oh, I've always wanted to. Okay, well, what if? And so, yeah, I'm amazed always by just the codes and the literal nature of astrology. As skeptical as I am, I literally am. Sometimes I'm like, am I a charlatan here? Like, it proves itself to me every day. It's the weirdest thing. I just love it. Sometimes I love it so much, by the way. Like, I have a crow right here on my altar that reminds me, because of one of the beautiful myths of Corvus and Coronis, not to take joy in the functioning of astrology. Because sometimes I'll be hearing just the most traumatic story from somebody, and I can see it in their chart so clearly. The astrologer's like, oh my gosh, this thing works, right? It's like, oh my god, like, the right response is, are you okay? Right? So my first mantra is always heart before chart. And as much as I'm interested, and you can hear me here probably in this weird blend of, oh, he's like some feet on the ground watching the crescent moon reflect Scorpio sunlight to the eyeballs, human. And he's like this super nerdy, seeking the crystal at the center of the earth for some mathematical need to prove what he does is actually a thing. Um, I really want in counseling to be heart first, right? In the
Yeah.
great sessions, like, I do a lot of sessions with astrology students, and so the chart's on the screen and we're kind of really cracking the code together. But when it gets real, all that goes away, and maybe the drum comes out, right? And we want to grow as human beings, because isn't that why we're here? And isn't
Yeah.
that why we seek counsel from stars or cards or design or whatever it may be at the times when it's needed? And sometimes even when it's not, but we know it'll just kind of give us a boost and help us know why we're in this weird place anyway.
Yeah. I always feel like no matter when you understand, maybe understand why things are happening in your life. I had Pluto moved into my sixth house, and when Saturn went through there, and just a lot of activations. Of course, I've got Pluto squaring Pluto right now. Um, but I had a lot of health issues, but really learning about what Pluto being in the sixth house can teach you, and learning, like maybe why I was obsessed. I mean, for 15 years, I was obsessed with health. I listened to podcasts about health. It was all about health. It was all about natural, holistic healing, which is a characteristic of, maybe a lesson of Pluto in your sixth house, as well as it orienting me to more service, right? Because I thought that maybe I would be on Food Network, or because I had this love of cooking and this love of food and this love of, and it took it away in a way, like got me down to only a few foods that I could eat, and I really couldn't cook. But it got me back to service, right? It got me back to, um, learning about meditation and learning about all of these things instead of the surface. How do I look? How do I present or whatever? And it really, it cut me down in a way, but understanding where the lesson is, it's like so beautiful, and you're so thankful, right? Because it got me here. And so that's what I love to pull for people, is like understanding, deeper understanding of who you are, because a lot of times the world tries to like beat that out of you. Like, no, you're supposed to act like this or look like this or be this career or whatever. So understanding that beauty that everybody carries in a different way, but also the lessons that come with that. And like, yeah, how can we love those lessons?
Yeah, it's, I mean, also a good example of like where astrology can just be another binding force of you should, or you're supposed to, or this is what you are. I really try to be careful as a practitioner not to speak in that language. It's hard not to be heard in that way,
Yeah.
right? Just because his college counselor maybe did some assessment and said this is what you should do, or my mom always told me I should be an engineer because I'm such a math nerd. right, not to look at a chart and say, hey, this is what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Or this is the way that you're going to be happy, especially if it's something that feels completely unattainable or non-realistic or can't like pay the rent, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, trying to help people stay free and actually become more free
Yeah.
through these sacred sciences rather than more constricted is a great challenge.
Yeah.
So obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously because of all the ears here might not be astrologers, but you're talking about Pluto transiting your sixth house.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, be careful with that one because that's like a 20-year assignment, um,
Well, it's
right? So
almost done, so I guess I'm reflecting
yeah,
on
I
it
mean,
and now.
I would probably personally look to very different conditions of why you might be having some health responses.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Pluto's in the third whole sign of your chart with Saturn, and one thing you're doing is having a podcast speaking about ancient Saturn, uh, magical, deep Pluto, right?
Yeah.
Processes with others, Libra. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that, we know at least in one regard, like this is part of, in this part of your
Yeah.
work, your career work, you're also a counselor, right? Which is part of the Libra thing. Like, again, I would even start with kind of career assessment in a different way. As
Yeah.
Pluto squaring Pluto, know that he's squaring a third house, Libra, Pluto with Saturn and all that.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a thing I really wanted to do. It's going to feel very out of place right now. So this will be like
That's
a big
okay.
retrograde back to a place we were. Because, you know, the human design, it's like, okay, well, we take this 360-degree circle and we're going to split it into 64 slices. Like, how big is that slice and what? And like, what is the math? So I wanted to just like offer a little thing around that because it's been a deep part of my wonder over time. And it really like dances to a current obsession of mine. My
Is
study
this
is
the
basically,
harmonic astrology that you're?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and from the Hamburg School in Germany, at some point, cosmobiology biology and like Uranian astrology were born, and they're very interested in like having the zodiac and having the halves and halves of the halves of the halves of the halves of the halves. And there's a very beautiful musical reason for this that I want to like attempt to play. Well, here I'll just do this sound. Right, this flute's not beautifully constructed, or maybe it's the flutist, but that like what we call a major scale, those 8 tones, where again the top tone is the same as the bottom, but in the next range. And that's also called the second harmonic. Like those of you who are watching this on the video, you'll see on the flute as I like cover holes on the way from the top to the bottom, the pitch gets lower. Because what's happening is I'm lengthening the amount of wood that the air is passing through, and it makes a longer wave. And the longer wave, the lower the frequency, the lower the tone, right? And so on this particular instrument, I can like close all of the holes and then open them all, and that's the octave. But for those of you watching now, I'm going to just hold them all closed, and instead of changing the without, the flute, I'm going to change the within. Because actually, when I'm playing this note, there's something inside my body that's mirroring the shape of the flute, or at least like the length of the air column that's producing that tone, that wave. Like it's also inside of me. So I can change the without, right? It just took all my fingers off of these holes of the flute, so it's playing like the least amount of wood. Um, but I can also change the within, and that helps me like differentiate the second harmonic from the first. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a second, so watch. I gotta like take this away from the mic because this doesn't sound so great. I'm still like learning how to do this on this instrument, but right. So you just heard the third harmonic. Now, without me changing my fingers on the flute, how the heck did that happen? Like some instruments don't have keys or things to open and close, and it's all about what's called the harmonic series. So the deal is this: every vibration is actually, or every note that you hear consists of many notes stacked on top of one another. So every vibration has within it like vibrations within vibrations within vibrations within vibrations. Like if you think about a vibrating string, it's just going to play a tone. So if you like play a guitar string, you hear this beautiful note, you're actually hearing many notes. And the what's called the second harmonic, it's the octave, right? So this note right here, it also has, like the sound that you're hearing also has within it that note. And actually the reason why your ears know this is some kind of wooden flute is because the wooden flute has its own kind of unique expression of these higher harmonics. Like I could play that same note over here, I think it's this, right? It's a very different instrument. It's constructed like this. I just played a plastic melodica, right? That has my air is going through reeds in it, like a harmonica to like make sound, right? It's a very different thing. But the reason why your ears can hear it's different is because of what we call its timbre. It's like these different amplitudes or volumes of these different harmonics, that any vibrating thing has these multiple vibrations, okay? And I mean, interestingly, like when I play this, that third one, it's not an octave, it's a different note. But the second one, it is the octave. It's the same note as the fundamental or the first harmonic in the next range. And so that's just cutting the string in two. Like if I pinch that guitar string in half, I play the octave. If I pinch it in a half, which is a quarter, I play the next octave. If I go a half of a half, or an eighth of the string length, the next octave. It's going to be a very high note, all right? But if I take that eighth and half it, 16th, 32, 64. So what the Uranian astrology does, and different developments before and after it, is they're very focused in on this halving sequence. My meditations have it kind of expressed by mitosis, the cell division of 1 into 2 into 4 into 8 and all of that we all did. And there's something that actually like finds that same little bit of a zodiac, right? If I divide the wheel of 360 degrees by these 64 gates, I get 5.625 degrees. It's like a weird little number, but that's what, like a half of 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 a half. Okay? And there's 5 1/3 of those in a sign, which is why, like, if you start at any sign cusp, the rest are going to overlap in places. There's probably another place where it actually meets a sign cusp too. But there's something in this, like, it's this octaving. It's like the octaves, or for astrology, you'll know this as oppositions and then squares. Oppositions being half of the circle, or we used to call them diameters. We used to call the squares because you can draw a square within the circle and it's going to touch in these 4 points that are 90 degrees apart from the previous and the following one, right? Like there's something in that perpendicularity that really like helps us manifest. Typically with some significant tension, with some conflict that will lead to action or responsive growth. Like it's these squares and oppositions, and if we take it further, they call the eighth of a chart, which is an octile, they call it a semi-square, and then maybe a semi-square for a 16th. Like you start running out of names super quickly, right? But there is something in this like 64 degree division, and I'm not saying this is why Ra like received his map of the I Ching 64 hexagrams to the 360 degrees of the zodiac circle or the sun's path in this way. But there is this astronomical thing that supports it. And if we look at the octaves as something that not only I think is like relative and resonant in like the mitosis of cell division from the one to the many through this doubling, um, there's also something that really supports this idea of these weird little 5.625 degree divisions that human design calls gates, or the gene key calls the keys, or whatnot. You know, a challenge I have with it personally, I also consistently participate with. Like after our session here, I'm going to start creating a bunch of soul song production notes, as I call them, where my dear friend Eric Deutsch, who is just a master pianist, will then take my notes and create a 12-minute song at the grand piano. That's our kind of reflection of this person's birth chart. So instead of just nerding out about it and learning all these rules and stuff, or me telling them who they are, they just get to close their eyes and listen to a song that we call the Song of the Soul, right? And what I do there is like, if the sun's in Scorpio, like if let's say if I did one for now, Scorpio in our map, because what I've done, and many of the ancient systems did this as well, is just take the 12 signs of the zodiac and relate them to the 12 half steps of a musical octave in the Western harmonic tradition. And so in the way that we're doing it, Scorpio's E. And unless I have multiple instruments, or sometimes in my notes for Eric, I'll say, hey, like there's a lot of E going on. Let's say I was doing this last week when Mercury, Mars, and the Sun were all in Scorpio. Instead, it's just like E's a note in the song, right? So there's 3 planets there, but all we have is E, and there's nothing in Sagittarius, so we don't have F. Like that's how we're creating these songs. And it's like limited, it's beautiful. Like the music that's coming out is amazing. We've done hundreds of these now. If y'all want to learn about it, by the way, at GeminiBrett.com, which is my website, you'll see on the sessions tab something about Song of the Soul. And it's great, and we're having such wonderful response from people. But I'm just kind of like, Scorpio is E, and you can put all the planets there and it's just E. And that's the thing about human design as well, right? Like it doesn't care so much from my understanding, and it's very limited. Like I see in the gene keys, they're doing these different sequences now based upon which planets are in which keys. But in a sense, in human design, it's like you either got this one or you don't. Is that right?
Do you mind if I share your chart at all?
No, that's fine. Like, does it care, for example? So when you say I'm 5'1", which actual points are determining the 5'1"ness?
So the sun right here,
Hold on, I
and
need to make my screen bigger. I got it.
so the sun here,
And the personality sun, that's like which key or gate the sun was in at the time of my birth, right? That's this first degree of Scorpio.
yes.
Yep.
So the sun is the first degree of Scorpio here. The opposite is what? Taurus, Earth, right?
Yeah. I'll just say astronomically, by the way, that's the shadow of Earth, not Earth. That's just like a thing I get triggered by when people.
Yes.
Anyway.
And then the design side, which is that 88 days before, is the 1, right? So we've got the degree, and if we look here, I've got this chart that kind of shows when it's moving through that, like the moment that it moves into the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 place in that gate.
Yeah, so you're taking these, what we saw, like a 5.625 degree division, and itself is divided into 6 mini slices, right?
Yes. Yes. So that's how we're getting the 5-1, which is kind of your archetype, right? So the 5 is kind of what we call the personality side, which you would see more. That 5 is really universal love, universal care. Also, the fixer loves to fix things. This archetype of you can't tell me a problem without me having a solution. I have a lot of 5s in my life, so I love the 5 line.
Wait,
Uh,
so you can't tell me a problem without me needing to find the solution or without also giving me the solution?
without you, something within you wanting to give a solution. You personally, the five person loves to fix, right? They're kind of the superhero that loves to fix for people, sometimes no matter what, right? I
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
be very careful with the fives in my life. If I say I have a problem that I'm just wanting to vent, I have
Right.
to say, please do not give me a solution, because they will always give me a solution. They're very good at it. This one line, which is the archetype of the investigator, which we know you've got this deep investigative personality that wants to go really deep. It needs that foundation, right? It has to have that foundation. I've got to learn all that I need to know to have this foundation that I can start growing from. And so that's that archetype of
And that'd be the
always,
difference between 5-1 versus 5-2 or 3 or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And these are very
And so what I'm
harmonic as
hearing just
well.
in this question I'm asking, this all comes from a combination of where the sun was when I was born and also where all 88 degrees before that degree of the zodiac, right? So it's not 88 days. I think that's like an important
Yeah.
thing to distinguish because the sun, though it moves about 1 degree per day, it doesn't. It moves about 1 degree per day. So when the sun is exactly 88 degrees before it where it was when you were born, like that's this design chart, which is this kind of amazing and strange thing, right? That was
Yes.
just received. So it's basically like you start with the sun sign, the whole like 5-1, which is so much about who I am, and I definitely agree that that describes me. Interesting, in the Enneagram, most place me as a 5, which they call the investigator too.
Yeah.
Um, that 5-1's coming from the sun and 88 degrees shy of my solar degree.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's that archetype there. And then, yeah, we have, if we were looking at your gene keys, it would be what the sun is life's work, that where the earth is, or what you're saying is the shadow of the earth, is kind of what grounds you, right?
Yeah.
And in the higher octave, they work really well together. In the lower octave or the shadow, they fight each other, right? So that 50 corruption, that shadow of always trying to figure out, maybe if you got really obsessed with what's really going on or what's hidden from you or whatever, it might overshadow the truth, right?
Yeah. Oh, I do.
Um, yeah. And then
Yeah, I
that,
mean that's like all my Gene Keys readings. Like I'm really good friends with Elijah
yeah.
Parker, Amelie. Like that's always the one. Like, dude, this is your conspiracy theorist self. Um, yeah. So I mean, an interesting thing here, right, is so the rising signs nowhere on the maps, right?
No.
So like it doesn't care about houses. It doesn't care if it was night or day. It's just simply like these divisions of the zodiac. It's all based only on like where the planets were by celestial longitude. I'll say a thing about that shadow of the earth. So people who draw the earth on the chart, it's like, well, if the sun's in Scorpio, then if you look from the sun, the earth is in Taurus. Well, I'm not on the sun, and the sun has its own zodiac. Like I believe it has its own crystal. Um, but what is always exactly opposite the Earth, right, or the sun, is the shadow of our planet, right? So when the moon's moving through the shadow of our planet, we experience the lunar eclipse. I want to do a reading with you, like off the camera sometime. But so what I was just seeing in that code, they're looking at like different planets, so Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, whatever, and also where those planets were when the sun was 88 degrees before my sun. So I have the sun at the first degree of Scorpio, so that's when it would have been at 3 degrees of Leo, um, which intriguingly is where Saturn is in my birth chart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure that brings in a thing. But right, so they're not worried so much about day. Maybe not by phase. Like, how much in Gene Keys is there a concern in comparing the placement of the moon to the placement of the sun?
So they're in. astrology versus this, I don't really see like it's more of the relationship, because when we're looking at, I'll share again.
Or let me ask another question on top of
Sure.
that question. So the moon's going to be in a key, the design moon, when the sun was 88 degrees before my natal sun, so I'm about 88 days before my birth. The
Yeah.
design moon's going to be in a key or in a gate as well.
Yeah.
In my design, in like what's filled in and not filled in, does
Yeah.
it care whether it's the moon in that key versus Venus in that key?
I care, but
Does the design like where those like where that line would be kind of completed, connected versus not?
no,
It doesn't care, right? Yeah. So that's
no.
like what I'm saying with my soul songs. I'm just like, yeah, you got Scorpio, you got an E, you don't have Sag, you don't have
Yeah.
F. You have Capricorn, you got the G flat, right? So we're building songs like that, and they're awesome and they totally work. But there is something kind of, yeah, from the astronomer in me, it's like, all right, like we just read about this stone circle producing ultraviolet based upon the time of day,
Yeah.
right? So I need a rising sign and the sun sign. The time of the year. Then I just need the sun, which this has, but also the phase of the moon.
Yeah.
And the phase of the moon would have to be kind of a relationship between the moon and the sun, which is going to happen here just kind of naturally, right? But and that's why I love that you're kind of combining the astrology with it, and it sounds more and more the astronomy too.
Yeah.
Like I feel like, and I've always talked to Elijah about this well as well. Like this whole game is going to change so much as soon as you bring a rising sign in it, because it's going to imply houses, and
Yeah.
you can have people born on the same, not the day, because the moon moves so quickly, she's going to change through those 5.625 divisions quickly. And if you're looking at a sixth of that, right, a sixth of 5.625 degrees is less than a degree, and the moon's going to do that in like, I don't know, an
Yeah.
hour and a little bit, right? But you will have like a bunch of children born with the exact same chart.
So even in human design, it's very interesting. I have some twins that are friends, and so I love looking at the lens through their charts,
Yeah.
right? Even just that 10 minutes is a different arrow. And I mean, it's a different rising sign as well, which is very interesting.
Well, I mean, 10 minutes, maybe not. I will say, like, twins is the great challenge to
Yeah.
astrology. And I mean, even twins, when we look to especially the harmonics, right? Like in harmonics and higher harmonics, it's like 10 seconds will make a
Yeah.
difference. Which, I mean, I think it gets a little bit like feet off the ground. Like
Yeah.
literally musically, we're getting into tones that cannot be heard with the human ear. That doesn't mean they don't exist, and Isabel will bark again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think twins are a great challenge. Like I'm very blessed to have had experiences in readings with lots of twins, and some of them, like, and oddly, you will see have similar experiences at similar times in their lives. Um, but oftentimes they're very different. And I almost wonder if it's like, oh, you get this part and you get that part, or a thing I love about the gene keys, right? Where it's kind of like looking at these beautiful gates, and there's the shadow
Yeah.
expression, and there's the city, kind of the highest version, and there's the thing
Yeah.
in between. It's like, well, maybe if you're doing the highest, the other has to do the shadow to balance it, or who knows, right?
Yeah.
It's a really great challenge. But rising signs, on average, they change every 2 hours, and that's a very gross average. Like Pisces and Aries in the northern hemisphere rise incredibly quickly,
Yeah.
and Virgo and Libra incredibly slowly. And in the southern hemisphere, that's reversed. And so there's a lot of interest, but just on average, it's a 2 hour thing. So if you're just looking at like whole sign astrology, right? I mean, you can have twins or just babies that are born in the same hospital within a couple hours, and their charts are very similar. Like we're looking at intricacies that will change that
Yeah.
significantly. But from what I can see of just like the design of the human design, right? Because this is me, right? And you told me it's in my human design. Like I want
Yeah.
to crack the code. I want to know what the math is. I typically like to show what the math is, which doesn't necessarily bring people to the storytelling circle. So I try to limit that as well. Um, but like I'm like, okay, what is this thing? How does it like? I like to take it apart and then try to put it back together. Sadly, oftentimes I can't put it back together
Yeah.
at all. But yeah, that piece it feels to me that like unless a planet moves across a gate or until a planet moves across the gate. And since there's many planets you're looking at, and especially since the moon is considered and she moves so quickly,
Yeah.
you're just going to have the exact same human design for like at times like an hour of time.
Yeah.
Or like if you look at transits, right? Like there's kind of a transit human design chart that we're all experiencing. That would be like mundane astrology,
Yeah.
right? But from my understanding so far, or my experience with human design practitioners so far, there's not a science or technique of looking at how the transiting chart is is applying to my own personal transiting chart, right?
They do have tools. They have, and you can even like explore it with this tool. I don't I don't feel as much of a connection to it as, let's say, when I look at astrology with the transit. So I don't do a ton of it. But yeah, like I have a where I could do, or that's a connection chart. I do love connection charts with this, though. It blows me away when we see things like that. But we could do a transit chart with yours, and it would show connections.
So this Maya Mechanics, this is clearly an online application, huh?
Yes, so this is one of my favorites. I like it because of all of the information, like we talked about. It gives me so much information about your. This is your indirect digestion, which we
Mm-hmm.
talked about. Which I in these arrows give us so much. So this is taking in the world more passively, but also like absorbing everything around. Where you have those people that are like, zoom, I'm a left arrow, right? The time I wake up to the time I go to bed, I'm locked into maybe a little bit more like this, and a
Yeah, they
right
call it
arrow is a little
gatherer
bit.
versus hunter.
Yeah.
Have you heard that one? Or
Yeah.
floodlight versus
Yeah.
spotlight? Mm-hmm.
And so this is digestion. How do you digest a problem? How do you digest the world? How do you digest your food? Yours is more indirect. Your digestion does not. It wants to kind of lay back and have time to digest, right? Where somebody with a left arrow is like boom, vibing in, and then this is like, where do you where how do you carb compartmentalize. Mine is a right arrow, so ours are opposite, right? Where you can grab details because you know where you put it. Mine is like, I have to have somebody ask me a question and it rise, because mine doesn't have any boxes. This says you have boxes. You can find where you put that information. I can't, right? I have to be asked and kind of jumble through the mess of all of it. It's a little bit more passive where I put it. I'm directly grabbing it. And then this
I
is.
have to ask because I'm just keeps jumping off the screen. What's color three kitchens mean down there in environment?
um so color gets into really intricate things, but what it's trying to say is your environment is kitchens. And so environment means, so like we have we have the cave people, that their cave is their comfort level. We have the market. We're going in a Jocelyn market is a great place. Yours is kitchens, which is really the alchemist. It's like knowing, which I already see with your music and things like that. It's like knowing, if I put this person, this person, this person, and this person in my table, wow, the conversation is going to be magic. Or if I take this ingredient, this ingredient, and this ingredient, put it together, I'm going to create something new. The kitchens person is kind of an alchemist of their environment, of what they're doing, how they're looking at things. And then if we looked at it from like like the health thing, it's like you do better in wet environments than dry environments. Um, but yeah,
That'd
and
be a good wedding planner.
then
with kitchen's consciousness.
Yes, yes. It's just very interesting whenever I see a kitchens person. They always have a neighborhood that they feel comfortable in. They bump into people. They are really good at putting the right people around a table or having a good conversation, or like you bringing the different people into your practice. It's a very kitchens thing.
So Rahuru received human design. Was in the early '80s?
Yeah,
Do you know?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and did he write about it, or was it people who like studied with him who have kind of written about it and developed it over time? Do you know?
So he has the definitive guide of human design is kind of what they call the Bible. Is he worked with somebody on that, getting it all down? So that's probably the book that you start with. Although he was a manifestor and he had the 51, which is shock. You have the 51. Um, you have it in Jupiter. So wherever your Jupiter is the 51. Um, which is shock, right? So he would try to shock people awake with his words. But he mostly taught and spoke these things. I haven't seen a ton of things that he's actually written, but he did sit down with the writer of that, and it's kind of his book. His name is on that book as well.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Linda Bunnell,
Yeah,
director of the International Human Design School,
yeah.
with Ra Uru. Cool.
Yes. Yes. But mostly he taught. He was trying to wake up the generators, he said, because generators create the energy for the world out of their sacral if they're doing what they love. If they're not, they're just screwing it up, he thought. So he was kind of trying to wake up the generators to live from this, doing what is a yes for them in their body instead of the mind. The mind gets us in trouble.
Yeah, I've heard that one as the aha versus response, right?
Yes, yes. Yours is very interesting though. You're a triple split. We could get into that probably at another time where we're definitely encroaching on over taking up your time right now.
Yeah,
But yes.
I'm cool for. I have a student just in a little bit. Um, but yeah, I'll holler for a reading sometime, or maybe we can do a trade.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I would love that. I was blown away with the couple of things that you pointed out in that moment that we got to talk on your live when you looked at my chart. So yeah, I would love to kind of share gifts a little bit.
Yay, cool. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me here. This is so fun.
Yes, this has been wonderful. What would let's just yeah, what so you're right now really excited about harmonics, right? I mean, I've noticed on your
It's like
YouTube
the
and
current obsession, and one of the reasons. So there's this whole thing, harmonic astrology. It's like very little practice of it thus far. Um, I like it because it combines so many of my different loves and the ancient loves of harmony and geometry and astrology all together. Some of the astronomer in me has challenges with it because, like, for example, when you were born with Pluto in Libra, he was nowhere near towards the place where the sun passes in Libra every year. He was 17 degrees away. That's called latitude.
yeah.
And so harmonics in general aspect theory, like in a way when you're going through a Pluto square Pluto transit now, Pluto's 90 degrees from where Pluto was when he was born. He's not at all, not in space, because it's only considering one dimension and not two, right?
Yeah.
So the geometer and especially the astronomer can kind of struggle with the whole thing of why we're like only looking at this one orbital path of the sun. And there's a very important reason for it. It's the place of matter and spirit.
Yeah.
But like there's so many different beings in me and the math nerd in me, right? I mean, like I obviously had my calculator out earlier, looking at 5.625 degree. You know, like that guy's pretty strong in me too. Like it's a place where all of those joys really come together, and it's also like fringe. You know, I mean, I love the opportunity to do a little pioneering in a
Yeah.
thing. Um, so yeah, that's my current obsession. Next month it will probably be something different. That's kind of how I stumble through life. I imagine that's pretty clearly indicated in my human design. And then, hopefully I take some time to rest and integrate. And that's where I get to see all of these different little things I've been studying are actually just all parts of the same thing, and that really helps to kind of realign my own cosmology and my approach and whatnot. Yeah, but that's the thing I'm talking about live on my YouTube channel, which is Gemini Brett, a ton right now. It's just harmonics and showing people how they can kind of simply calculate harmonic resonance and some resources. And there's very few of them of what this thing might mean. Like yesterday, I was talking about Jupiter and Saturn 7/37ths of a zodiac apart from one another. It's like, well, what is that? You know? But then I read a few things and it's like, oh my god, this is like exactly what's happening on my TV screen and like stimulating in me right now. It's like this seems real, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean the main things that I love are reconnecting people with the actual sky. I'm like my heart smiles so much when I heard you say earlier like, "Hey, you're like inspiring me to go outside more." And you're talking about, hey, this thing's happening, I'll go out and look at it, because for me it's like we don't have to know what it's supposed to mean or anything. There's just something about going to receive it. And even if I'm sleeping, I am, because
Yeah.
again, I'm talking about my experience, the first experience of the thing. But there's another thing also when I go out and like see it and hear it and smell it and feel it. And like I would never have that experience of a blue heron and an owl and three deer. Well, I might in my dreams, but like
Yeah.
when Jupiter's being occulted by the moon here, it's like go out and experience it. So my number one thing is like helping to find ways personally to like get out of my mind and really embody these heavenly happenings, right? So it's like, okay, what is that? How could I see that? What would that be? And so the astronomy is a huge piece of that. Geometry has been one of the most amazing teachers I had experienced once, and it was just like, dude, you got to stop watching like spirit science videos and get a compass in your hand and actually just start sweeping circles. I drew one circle trying to draw the flower of life, which is 51 circles, and I just went into this weird trance and woke up with like literally with some of my drool right in the center of the circle, so it looked like the sun glyph the way we draw it today. And like I just learned so much in that weird experience, right? So the geometry, like I just love helping people put tools in their hand so that we can find this place in between like the brain mind and the body mind, which is the heart, because the art of the chart starts in the heart.
Yeah.
So my apologies because I keep answering questions that you're not asking,
That's
but
okay.
hopefully they have something that to
No,
do.
I love it. I that was one thing that human design the my teacher, I wasn't like the hugest fan of the teacher that I chose, but she would just say stop thinking so much constantly, because that's kind of what human design shows you, is to get out of the mind and into the body, and especially if you're a generator, to respond to life. And so we're just going out and we're asking like the question and watching life respond to us, like you do with the animals and the all of the things that are responding to you, right? You're but yeah, you have an open head, I have an open head, and so I always try to kind of imagine that as a cloud, like with nothing in it, um, because that's such an issue for the open head. It's such a pressure center to say like, what do I need to be thinking about? What's going on? What should I be piling in this head that can never be full, right? But taking that experience to another level of like emptiness and just being present. And I just think that is where the magic is. So I love that you're always bringing people back to this grounded being in what is going on, and loving this earth, because that's what I always say. I'm always kind of a grounded person. It's like we could go in all of these different directions about where the soul is and where we came from and all of those things, but it's like we're here. What are we here to experience, right?
Yeah. And so many people are teaching us that we're this virus that are contaminating the earth. And, like I would say one of our jobs is just to go love earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, stop burning so much stuff and whatever, but like go like hug a tree. Go like explore the amazing sensation of being on a hike and you see a lynx. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everything changes, and just being in that amazing state of presence and gratitude for the opportunity to like be in a body in a place. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, I'm so inclined, as you can see, to when something runs by to ask, what does it mean? And while I might never know, I think just asking is opens and offers the fuel for really fantastic journeys. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
I think
and
the
I'm glad to
beautiful
have one together with you here today.
Yes, I think the beautiful thing, I was reading Illusions again. I don't know if you've ever read the book Illusions with the blue feather on it.
I
Um,
have not.
oh my gosh. Okay, well, you need
Yeah,
to
I'll
read
check it
that.
out.
You could read it in a day. It's a very light read, but it's
Nice.
basically a fable of a messiah coming and teaching this plane driver, and he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not gifted or anything, but he's just dropping this knowledge, and he gives him this book, and so along the way, he's like learning this book, and then he gets to the end of the book, and it's like everything in here could be wrong. And I just think that that's kind of the Gemini's path, right? In some ways, and I have Mercury, Sun, North Node, and Mars in Gemini, so it's a very strong area for me, but it is very much this like I want to know everything about everything, but I could be wrong. None of it could be real, right? Like kind of this duality of that. And I love how you walk that path with the zodiac, what houses you use, all of the things. It's not like anything's like, oh, this is an iron fist and this is the truth. But you're
Yeah, I
always
try to
digging.
run away from those people as fast as I can.
Me
I think
too.
for some of my students, I think it can be a frustration because I'd prefer to teach like this is how this person does it, this is how this person does it, this is how this person does it, what resonates with this is what I'm doing currently instead of like this is the way, right?
Yeah.
But I so much do prefer that like let's look at all the things and some of them might be right and some of them might be wrong and it's actually just more fun instead of choosing which is which right now to explore it all and then the heart knows, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for being on the show today. And everybody, you dropped in beautifully there a couple of times, like your YouTube or your website. Is there anywhere else? I mean, I think if you go to your website, GeminiBrett.com, you can go to your Facebook or your Instagram, which I love watching your Instagram lives and things like that. So everybody should check that out.
Yeah, I
But is
just
there
realized I
anywhere?
should make those shorter because there's no way to like rewind them. And so if I'm talking for an hour, it's like kind of. So I think what I'm doing lately is just like a little thing on Instagram to be like, come over to the YouTube page. I might at some point go to Rumble, as many of people that I listen to do, because they're like, I just got a flag on my YouTube page for describing somebody else's life and the way that they worked with their autistic child. And, you know, like that's a just terrible thing. I,
Yeah.
I just hate censorship and self censorship. So at some point, if I can sort it out and get people to come hang out, I might go over to that space where I'm seeing people being able to exercise
Yeah.
free speech. But right now, in this moment, the best places to catch me are probably at my YouTube page, and then again, as you said, GeminiBrett.com is where you can come find what I'm up to. Sign up for the mailing list. I don't mail off, and I need to update the website and all that. And it used to be Facebook, but they've just now made it like if you're not paying for people to see stuff, they don't see it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm having a hard time with all of the government organizations.
Don't get
You
me
know,
started. I couldn't find my eyeglass place because they must not have paid Google and it's not on any map. And I'm like,
well,
whoa, what is going on?
yeah. Yeah, there was a time when you could go live on Facebook and like it would be like a party and there would be so many people that I could engage with and stuff. YouTube's been and Instagram's been fun in that regard lately, but I think again it's like if I'm making these hour-long things and there's no way to stop it and rewind it and come back if you want to finish it or fast
Yeah.
forward if I'm babbling as you can tell I do. And so I do appreciate that in YouTube. I just wish it didn't have such a censorship thing. So maybe at some point I leave. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate the opportunity of this weird World Wide Web to connect with friends all over the place.
Yeah.
and also have to remember to do that in person sometime too. So, that being said, Angela, maybe I'll get to see you on Earth someday and we can stare at the stars live side by side.
Yes, that would be that's actually my intention for this next year is to get to go to different places and meet more people in person because while I love what happened in the world to give us this experience of everybody being able to connect and yeah, connecting with people I would have never been able to meet, we are losing that face to face in some ways, and so I definitely want more of that in my life.
Yeah, do you mind if I share a few places where I will be coming
Yeah,
up
I would love
soon?
that.
Okay. So, one is the Cosmic Life Expo in Los
Okay.
Angeles. I mean, unfortunately at like a Hilton. But it's this amazing gathering of like so many people I respect from different fields of independent research and astrology and channels and stuff. So I'm really psyched to have been invited to speak there. I'll be doing a workshop and a post conference thing about reconnecting to natural time. We'll kind of like how do we get out of this calendar construct and clock construct and also just experience the day and night and the phases of the moon and stuff like that. So that's in February of 2024, Conscious Life Expo. Um, I will be in Austin, Texas at Eclipse of the Heart with my dear friends Russell and Shannon, who at the Shift channel are having an eclipse gathering for the total solar eclipse that's coming through the United States in Aries time of 2024. So look into that Eclipse of the Heart in Austin, Texas, and then at NORWAC Astrology Conference. So for people who are interested in astrology, it's a really wonderful conference that happens in Seattle, Washington, where I used to live around Memorial Day weekend every year. So it's the last weekend of May. And in that one, I will be doing a pre-conference workshop on harmonic astrology and how to bring that in. So that would be something to really only attend if you're interested in astrology and have some of the astrological vernacular, because I will nerd out. But those are places where I would love if you. By the way, if anyone's listening to this, if we haven't met each other yet, if you're those places, please pull me aside. Tell me you saw me here in Angela's podcast, and let's hang out. We'll get outside and look at some stars together.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for your time and for bringing us on this journey of storytelling and music and kind of tying them all together. It was so beautiful to get to connect with you and share that.
My treat. Thanks for having me. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yes.